Welcome to American Press Productions, independent political analysis. This is today's top story. U.S. Attorney Andrew Lelling has announced a $25 million federal bribery case where wealthy parents allegedly paid to have their children admitted into elite American universities. This story may at first not seem particularly unique or interesting, but it is indicative of a much larger problem that threatens to undermine the efficacy of the United States and all that makes it great. These students did not earn their way into college, and in that, the story ties into the growing trend of the fight to erode away meritocracy. In light of this scandal, The Guardian reports meritocracy is a myth invented by the rich. The Washington Post called meritocracy a myth. The two publications are either operating on a level of astounding ignorance or devious subversion. The so-called rich in this admission scandal have used their wealth to sidestep meritocracy to be admitted into elite universities. The admission process is supposed to only admit the very best, the very brightest, and those who show an exemplary drive to accomplish more than their peers. That is the very basis for meritocracy. The best of us are afforded the very best opportunities, best being defined on skill and accomplishment alone. An article posted on Harvard's Gender Action portal titled The Paradox of Meritocracy in Organizations argued that organizations that emphasize merit-based cultures may inadvertently be disadvantaging people. The Atlantic reports, a meritocracy is not what people think it is. The paper elaborates, the college admissions scandal has illuminated the fact that the world's original definition was satirical, but Americans, for the most part, have ignored that entirely. So let's investigate this claim of satire. To do so, we take a historical journey, and we begin at one of the world's first civilizations. In the year 2000 BC, in the area known today as China, there existed around 3,000 different political entities, or clans. All of these clans engaged in warfare with their neighbors, the winner absorbing the other's lands and people. Warfare was conducted by the nobility, the ranking members of the clan. By the year 221 BC, only one clan existed. They defeated and absorbed all the others and created the Qin dynasty. The Qin accomplished this by bypassing the hereditary nobles, conscripting peasants into their army, and allowing the most talented individuals in their kingdom to fight their wars. By instituting these modern meritocratic-based institutions, the Qin conquered all their enemies and established the first example of a meritocratic-based administrative state, which saw the implementation of the civil service examination, which was a test to give highly coveted government positions to the most talented individuals. These meritocratic institutions have survived to this day, and China can thank their survival and most of their success on them. Meritocracy is not a natural state for humans to live under. We are more inclined to operate under a patrimonial patronage-based system, which means that whatever we accomplish and gain in our life, we desire to pass on to our children, so that they may in turn do the same and continue the family line. But patrimonial patronage systems tear apart empires. While a great general may conquer many lands, his children aren't always the best candidates to rule over them after his death, which has caused many empires to fracture and dissolve not long after the death of the one who created them, such as the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire realized the dangers inherent in a patrimonial patronage system. Their solution was to enslave Christian children from conquered lands and train and raise them to hold the very highest administrative and military positions in the Ottoman Empire. The system was successful, but in absence of any strong meritocratic-based institutions, the empire eventually devolved back into patrimonialism, weakening it into a state where the conquered eventually took their lands back. It wasn't until the late 17th century that the world saw its first true meritocratic state. The state of Brandenburg, its capital Berlin, was a poor state, at least relative to the other German states at the time, such as Saxony and Bavaria. But without any natural resources or riches, Brandenburg became what we know today as Prussia, forged from the violence of the 30 Years' War, the absolute savagery of the Swedes, and the uncaring imperial army from Austria. Brandenburg was forced to survive against armies many times the size of their own. Meritocratic military reforms transformed a small army into a deadly fighting force, forcing far greater European powers to acknowledge Brandenburg's military acumen. But it wasn't all victories. Entire towns in Brandenburg were pillaged, burned down, and 80 to 100% of the town's population massacred. The atrocities brought upon Brandenburg would by modern terms make Darfur look like a Sunday stroll. After the wars, and Brandenburg shortly after became known as Prussia, their state government adopted the meritocratic reforms that saw their army become one of, if not the, most efficient fighting force in Europe. It was Prussia who united all of the German states to officially become Germany, and it was because of their efficient form of government that in the late 19th century the German economy had surpassed other great colonial powers such as France and was on track to overtake the British Empire to be second only to the United States. It was also because of their meritocratic-based government that Germany was able to defeat far larger military powers than themselves in the First World War, dismantling the French and pushing back against a Russian army whose sole purpose in World War I can be summed up from a passage out of a Russian military journal published in January of 1914, which stated, quote, "Not just the troops, but the entire Russian people must get used to the fact that we are arming ourselves for the war of extermination against the Germans and that the German Empire must be destroyed even if it costs us hundreds of thousands of lives." End quote. The Germans repelled that army despite the fact the Russians called for a full mobilization of their military a full week before Germany did. And now we tie in all of the previous examples to the British Empire and show why the trend in America to do away with meritocracy is both alarming and dangerous. Once England was formed, being on an island, they were rarely forced to use their army to defend themselves as Chin or Prussia was. But their navy was a different story, and it was because of their navy that the British Empire formed. As the British conquered lands across the earth, they governed their new territories in the same style as their homeland. Now, while the British government at the time was far more advanced than most in the world, it still had its problems, namely a patrimonial patronage system, where the nobles and elites of the country would send their children to top universities such as Cambridge or Oxford, then expect their children to govern conquered territories. In the 18th and early 19th century, territories such as India and Cambridge and Oxford became a mess and embarrassment. Students at the two elite universities largely stopped attending class and would instead go out riding, hunting, and drinking. Graduation exams consisted of only a few questions. One example, quote, "Who founded University College?" End quote. A former government administrator compiled a report titled the Trevelyan-Northcote Report, which included reform recommendations in part based off of the meritocratic Prussian state. In it, he pinpointed the problems of patrimonialism that had infested the British Empire, debasing its greatness and rotting it from within. He recommended the creation of a new top university, the London School of Economics, tailored to the specific needs of administrators in the British Empire, open to the British middle class. Not to be outdone, Cambridge and Oxford reformed their lax practices to compete and outperform the new university. Almost at the onset of the creation of the British Empire, patrimonialism set in, but because of the meritocratic reforms established by the Trevelyan-Northcote Report, the empire was able to sustain itself and grew to become the largest and most powerful empire in world history, the preeminent superpower for more than a century, and efficiently managed territories across the globe. And it all started with meritocratic reform in the universities. Now, Cambridge, Oxford, and the London School of Economics are top universities in the world. They hired the best and accepted the best. The London School of Economics was created specifically for the middle class so that no one could buy their way in. Now put all of that in context to the claims made by the aforementioned newspapers. If meritocracy is a myth, then so is the British Empire, so is Prussia, and so is China. Their claims are not just ridiculous, they are frighteningly dangerous, because once we officially drop meritocracy, people will be accepted into universities and hired by companies not based on their skill and accomplishment, but by other factors that, while may not be specifically based in patrimonialism, will set aside an individual's talent and ability for other factors deemed out of want and not a necessity nor efficiency. Aside from the decades-old practice of affirmative action, universities already admit students based off of racial quotas, where whites and Asians are required to score hundreds of points higher on their SAT than blacks and Hispanics. This is practiced by elite universities in America, but there is currently a lawsuit aimed to end it. If the practice is not ended, but instead expand it, and we further erode meritocracy from our universities and hiring process, America will experience a reversal of what made the British Empire great, of what made the Prussian state great, and what has allowed China to survive for so long. The branding of meritocracy by our media as a myth just to serve the rich is not just fake news. It is, as President Trump once said of the media, they are acting as the enemy of the people.